Ishwarama's resplendent sun. It's the start of a bright new day. Time to rise, time to shine, Lord divine. Time to lead us along life's way. Awake, Lord of Buddha party. Awake, O Lord, over all mankind. Awake, O Lord of compassion, that the world good fortune may find.
Thank you.
Pranams at the lotus feet of beloved Bhagavan Sri Satya Sai Baba. Please, Swami, accept these words in this session as an offering to you. Please, Swami, think through us. Please, Swami, feel through us. Please, Swami, speak through us. Please, Swami, act through us. And most of all, Swami, please love through us. And make us aware of these things as you do them, dearest beloved Swami. Surprise. We are going to try something a little bit different this afternoon for a couple of reasons. One is we're taking the words in the program, audience participation, rather seriously. Not heavily seriously and not grimly seriously, but rather seriously. And secondly, this morning we had a wonderful meeting with the youth group, and in that session we structured it in a way, we ended up having only a half hour, and it was the Sandweises and ourselves. And so rather than just letting things drift, we structured it quite severely and yet easygoingly, and it worked quite well. So we're going to be doing that same thing this afternoon. So prepare yourselves really to participate in a sort of a structured kind of a session. And I'll tell you a little bit about the structure now, so you'll have it in your minds and in your intellect also, and in your brains, and in your bodies,
and in your hearts.
Thank you. And then we'll do some talking, and then we'll go back to the audience participation session, which we happen to be calling wisdom, invoking the wisdom space in this whole conference, because that's really where the wisdom is. What we'll be doing in a few minutes, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, is this. We'll be asking you to respond to a couple of questions. Question number one will be this. By the way, today's theme is always turning Godward. Always, always, as Swami says, always, always turn toward God. So under that rubric, we'll be asking you to think of the two things that you're most satisfied with relative to your own turning toward God nowadays, and think of the two questions or the two things that you're most concerned about, or the two questions that seem to be bugging you at this time relative to that overall aim of turning Godward. And then we'll structure the questions to come out in a very deliberately we'll bring out 6 questions, 3 from the ladies and 3 from the gents. See if there are any themes that start to form, and then we'll respond to them in a structured way that also includes you in the responses. So we're teasing apart then the questions and the responses. Now this technology really comes from years and years of going into companies and having to work very quickly with people who don't have much time. So when we overstructure that, we found that there are ways of overstructuring it that still don't take away the humanness of it and still can tap right into the heart, as Louise says. So we'll be using some of that technology here this afternoon in a little while. But also we know too, from talking with all of you, having some very, very nice stories shared with us and so forth, that you want to hear more from us. So we'll try to satisfy some of that anyway, to an extent, and then we'll open it up for discussion with everyone. Now we're sitting down for a purpose. One is we're elevated a little bit so that you can see us, because I think we hear better when we see, and we all know that. And secondly, there are 2 empty chairs up here, you notice. And those chairs are for other people to respond to these questions that will be coming out. Now who the other people are, the other people will be you. So we'll have some microphones on each side in the audience for you to ask your quick questions, and then we'll have chairs for those of you who have responses to those questions to come up and join us up here for one response. So for your relatively quick response, you can join us and then vacate the chair. So what we really are creating here is sort of like a little fishbowl with 2 extra spaces in it, so that we're constantly tapping into and revolving, the wisdom of the group is revolving through these chairs up here. Now, will it work? I think so, if you make it work.
The divine wisdom.
Okay. Louise will just share some stories first, and then I'll share a few stories. And while we're doing that, you have mulling over in your mind somewhere, in the front of your mind, in the medium part of your mind, or in the back of your mind, having you mull over what your answer is to those questions. The 2, remember what they are, the 2 things that you're most happy with relative to your own turning Godward these days, and the 2 questions that you have regarding that turning Godward. So please.
Well, I thought first of all, I'd like to tell you how much joy and love I feel at this conference. I mean, your eyes sparkle, and I just get so charged looking at you. You're so Swami-ish. That's the only word I can put on it. And I just feel like I'm with Swami. And I feel tremendous gratitude. The first story I'll tell is that Sam and I alluded to having Swami, always having Swami as our best friend. And I'll tell you a story. Swami blessed us going to Kodaikanal this year. And I was so excited. I couldn't wait. So we went up to the mountain top in April. But the weather was another story. It rained every day. And there's, the Savadals at the gate, and they're kind of strict. They're especially strict there. And I kind of got used to it after a while, getting jostled around and being placed where they wanted me to be put. And but then there was this one day, I got out of the car, and it was pouring, absolutely pouring. My sari was soaked. I mean, my hair was soaked, everything. Anyway, I got out of the car, and all of a sudden, this quotes, mean Savadal. She said to me, "Come." And I thought, isn't that funny? So I marched up there. What does she want? What did I do wrong? And so she said, she was already soaked, and she was holding an umbrella over her head. And she put the umbrella over my head, and she said, "I'm here to take care of you." And I said, "That's exactly what Swami says to me." And so she gave me the umbrella. She said, "Here, you keep it and stay warm." And so I did that for a while until it was time to go up to see Swami. And then and the rain stopped, and I decided to put my umbrella down, and I shook off the rain. And then I realized all around the top of the umbrella were words: best friend, best friend, best friend, best friend, best friend. So another miracle. That's exactly what I saw it as, a miracle from Swami. Another thing that I'm going to tell you what I do, because I see everything as one. I see that we are all one. I see everything as all one. And what I do, I just want to share it with you because it's so important to me, I guess, right? So what I ask for every morning and every night and every time I can think of it is I put vibhuti on my head and I ask for divine thinking and divine action and divine vision and divine hearing and divine taste and divine speaking. But I say to Swami, most of all, divine love. And that really, it changes my whole vision of everything, of my whole life. Now I'll tell you another story about Kodai that happened to me last year, not this year. Swami was giving discourses every day, and in one discourse, he got up and he was saying, everything is an illusion, everything you see is an illusion. I am an illusion. God is an illusion. You know, just you are an illusion. And afterwards, I came home and I said to Jack, I said, well, why am I here on this earth if everything is an illusion?
No, you were just really disturbed.
I was so disturbed. I said, here, I'm supposed to be an instrument, and what am I doing? Everything's an illusion. And my whole prayer to Swami always has been, you and I are one. You and I are one. You and I are one. And then the next day, he gave a discourse, and it looked like he was just looking at me all the time. And he got up, and he, just like that, said, don't say you and I are one, because that separates us. Say, I am I. From now on, say, I am I. So that's what I do. I always say, I am I, but I add a little something. I say, pure divine love.
Okay, thank you, Louise. Let me tell you a couple of funny stories that happened. You know Swami's sense of humor. Well, these stories are just too funny to keep inside of me with this group. And one of them has to do with a huge group from Argentina was there at Kodai this year, and they broke into, like, they separated themselves into 4 separate groups so they could get in and for an interview with Swami. Well, we were friends with one of the people from Argentina, the older man from Argentina who was looked at as sort of the leader of the contingent there at that time anyway. So finally Swami came by. Every day they were asking for interview. And then he came by finally, and he said, yes, go in. So he said that to group, let's say group C, of which this older fellow was a part. So two people from another group snuck into the group. So there they were sitting up on the porch outside of the interview room, very stiff, facing straight ahead, so afraid that they're going to get caught by Swami because they're not supposed to be part of Group C. They were really part of Group B or whatever. So Swami goes up and he looks around with a wrinkled brow. He said, too many people. How many people did you say? And the man said, I said 21 people in this group. He said, too many people. The room is small. He said, who's not supposed to be here? And he looked at the two people that weren't supposed to be there. Who's not supposed to be here? So finally they get up and they walk away very, very upset. And they look at this older fellow and say, traitor, betrayer. And Swami's laughing. Another one of those stories is another older fellow from another country. I'm going to do a little gossiping about him, so I'm not going to say where from. He was a very strong, wonderful man, strong side devotee. He was one of the Western countries, and his wife passed away. And in due time, very proper, he fell in love with this younger woman in this eye organization. And he was maybe 71 or 72 years old, and she was 39 or 38 years old. Big age difference. And he was very concerned about this because he didn't know what that meant and what Swami would think about this. So he's very, very worried about this age difference. And finally, he and this younger lady went to Prashanti to straighten this out if they could. So they went to, and he sat on the veranda, and he sat there for weeks. Swami didn't even pay any attention to him, and he was sweating blood. He was really concerned about this, and he was very worried. Finally, one day, I was sitting next to him. Finally, one day, Swami went over to him, and he looked at me, he said, oh, you go inside for an interview. And as he walked by him, he said, oh, and bring the old lady too. So see, Swami so concerned, or so knows that he's so concerned about, bring the old lady too. Another thing, and this fits in with best friend, and this is a funny story too. A couple of years ago, I was there, and this fellow who had been married by Swami 7 years previously, and they had written their own wedding vows and so forth. Very, very pretty, another Western man, and his wife had gotten divorced. So they gotten divorced 3 years earlier. So they got married by Swami, and then they got divorced. Can you hear me? Everybody hear me okay? Okay. So he was afraid to go back. For 3 years he didn't go. He's a big guy, but he was afraid to go back. So finally he went back. And one time, by the way, he even went there and he got to as far as the village, Prashanti, or the Puttaparthi, and then he was afraid to go in. I mean, so you could see it was really, really bothering him, because after all, they had written these beautiful vows, and then they had gotten divorced. They couldn't make it.
Swami.
Yeah, Swami had married them and everything, so it was really a very important thing. So then finally, the year that I'm telling you about, he finally went back. And the day that he arrived in the ashram, that very day, the British Sai Organization magazine had been going through their archives, and they had found the wedding vows that these people had written for one another. So they published them in the magazine. So here's this guy, finally he's sitting next to me and he's telling me all this story. He didn't know that the wedding vows were published. And I said, your wedding vows were published today. He said, oh, so I know that. And I said, isn't that a Leela? And he rose up to full height. He said, Leela? You think it's funny? He said, man, there's pain, nothing but pain in this. Pain, you don't know what the experience is. You've never been divorced. Blah, blah. So, so I was crouching down. Oh, okay. So anyway, he still sort of he'd tried to hide behind the pillars on the veranda, and then and he was over though in the Punachandra helping the boys rehearse a part of a play, and Swami abruptly walked off the veranda and walked over there. So he had to confront him. So Swami said, come over to the side. So he brought the man over to the side. He said, that wasn't a very nice thing you did. You shouldn't have gotten divorced. Very, very bad of you. Not very good, not good. Why did you do that? Oh, you Westerners, I know how you are, don't you? So he really bawled him out. And the guy was, he's probably like 6'5" and maybe 300 pounds. By the time Swami got done with him, he was under 100 pounds and he was like 3 feet tall. So he came back to the veranda and he was in shock. He's sitting next to me in shock. And, and Swami said this to him. He said, "You should remarry that girl. You should remarry her." So that really put him into shock. And his eyes were like two targets. He was staring off into space. And he was telling me, he said, by the way, and I'm not gossiping because he's telling everyone else this too. So he's telling me, he said, "Can you imagine? He told me to remarry her." And I said, "Wow." I said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "The same problems that were there before are going to be there again." He said, "I know that." So, well, he thought for a minute. He said, "I guess we'll just have to get over it." He said, "I guess I will." So he went out to the village that night and he called up his ex-wife. Can you imagine? Like they'd been separated for 3 or 4 years by this time. So he called up his ex-wife and said, "Swami told us to get remarried." Can you imagine that phone call? It was like one of those Bob Newhart phone calls. "Hello, honey." You wouldn't say honey, would you? "Hello, miss," whatever. "Swami told us to get remarried." So she was in shock. So then he came back, and the next day Swami called him in very shortly, very briefly. He said, this was the next day after the phone call. He said to him, "You have a new friend?" Long pause. He said, "Yes, I do, Swami." He said, "She has 2 daughters?" He said, "Yes, Swami." He said, "Very sweet, very nice daughters. She's a very nice girl. Why don't you marry her instead?" So he came staggering out of Swami's interview. The total daze. And he told me all this. And so I was thinking, I said, what is this? What is this teaching? Again, we can't forget, Swami relentlessly, always, every instant, everything he says is for our own growth. Everything. He doesn't make small talk. So I'm wondering, what is this? And I realized it's the same story as the one that I told the other day about finally giving up on the title of the book. Finally saying, like being ready to walk away from the publisher, after all those years of hard work and so forth, finally releasing it, finally surrendering to Swami. Well, I think this story is the same exact story. It's Swami giving this man an experience of surrender to him. Big test was, he didn't say go call her, he just said you remarry that first wife. So, big quotes, big test. Swami, by the way, Swami says, "Yes, I give you tests, but to me they're not tests because I know how they're going to come out." And so in this case, Swami knew how it was going to come out, but what he did is gave this fellow the wonderful experience of surrendering, really surrendering to his guru, really surrendering to Swami. So it's a funny story, and yet, as everything, there are deep implications in it. Okay, let me talk about a couple of other things quickly, and then we'll get to those questions. One of them is Swami brought me into the parlor in Kodai the year before. That was the year before the rainstorms. And he had me speak to the boys on dharmic management. And I walked into the room, the parlor, and it was beautiful. As Sam was saying this morning, it's like family. So I walked in, and Swami said, "Come here." Immediately beckoned so I could take Pada Namaskar. And then he said, "You talk on dharmic management." All right. So I stood up and I talked to the boys. And the thing that came to me was this. A phenomena that happened as I was writing the book was this, that every question I dove into, and I circled and spiraled around deeper and deeper into the question, the deeper I got into the question, the more I realized when I was at the bottom of the depth, is that the answer to all questions was the same answer. And it surprised me at first. And I started getting the same answer, questions about staffing, questions about communicating with employees, questions about relationships to work or whatever, questions about work teams and all that. The answer to all those questions, once you get through the worldly stuff, was the same answer. And I couldn't get over it. And I thought I was wrong. I thought there must be something wrong here. But then I realized, though, that this was deep connection with Swami, and he was helping write this book, so how could I be wrong? So I started accepting that answer, and as I accepted it, it grew, and the magnitude of it became very, very important. And don't forget, I'm here in the parlor with these boys, and they're all listening to this. So I leaned over, I said, the answer that I found at the center of all these 8 or 9 key questions that people have to face in this world as they go through life of work and so forth, is the answer is love. At the center of every question, the answer is love. And immediately when I said that, Swami said, yes, yes, and he leaned forward, and the boys, of course, all their heads snapped to where Swami was. And I said, and Swami looked at them, he says, love is God. It was so clear. And love is God, he said. And that reminded me of something that Bob Bazzani Bob Bazzani spent 30 days with Swami and the boys in the house one year. And he came back and he said, Swami looked at him one day, he said, do you know what the secret of life is? Do you want to know it, Bazzani? He said, yes, I do, Swami. He said, gratitude is God. And then it reminded me of another talk that I'd heard from Indulal Shah, as a matter of fact, when he came through the States a couple of years ago. He talked about people, when people ask for peace, what they're really asking for is God. He said, and then he said, Swami says, really, that peace is God. So here we are. Love is God. Gratitude is God. Nothing less. Peace. When we seek peace, we're seeking God. Nothing less. This is what it's all about. And there are several other of those answers, as you well know, as well as I do. But that's fascinating. There's nothing less or nothing more than that.
2 years ago when I came back from Kodai, I woke up in California and I literally sobbed for 2 hours out of joy I was so gratified, so loved. I mean, I just felt so loved, just like I do now.
And so grateful for it, really. That's it. Okay, now, with that as sort of an overview or framing, if you will, let me ask you those questions, okay? And we have these 2 empty chairs. And the questions, I'd like to arrange it this way, if you would, please. Think in your own mind of what are the 2 things about your own turning toward God that are most pleasing to you, and the 2 things that you have the biggest questions about. Now, see what happens. You start distilling down. It's a distillation exercise, isn't it? And then, with those questions, you ask those questions from the microphones out there. And so make the questions as brief and as short as you can. And then the responses, Louise and I will respond, but this is where the trick comes in. We're also going to ask you, who have responses to these questions, to come up and join us and sit in one of these chairs and respond, and then we'll be tapping into that wisdom of this whole space.
And don't be shy.
Thank you for the admonition. Okay? So I'm asking you now to go inside, take 12, 15 seconds. So what are the 2 things that I'm happiest about, and what are the 2 things that I have questions about relative to my current spiritual growth? And what I'd like to do is structure it one more notch. I want to take 3 questions from each side of the room before we answer any of them, because that will give us an overview of what kind of questions are going to be asked. It'll give us, meaning us, the whole group, that overview. So with the hand up, yeah, please go to the mic and do that asking, and then I'll take some notes as you do it, and I'll listen actively. So will Louise. Thank you.
Sainam, I'd like to say that I'm totally overwhelmed by the video that we were shown today. Sai Baba's video discourse that he gave today. He said, first be. One of the things that struck me very much was he said, first be, and then he said, do, and then declare. And of course, it's typical of Baba. He has this way with words. He's always prescribing to us.
Okay, wonderful.
And I'd like to know how exactly do you make that transition from the being to the doing stage, because it is really doing that's hard. It's hard never to be jealous.
Good. I hear a wonderful question. First be, do, and then declare. And the question is, how do you make the transition from being to doing? Excellent. Okay, now a question from the men's side, please. Quick. Any? You remember these are the two questions that you have that are sort of still churning around in you.
Saram, I wanted to ask you, how do you respond in a loving manner to someone who may be abusive to you, whether it be at work or school?
How do you respond lovingly to someone who is what to you?
Abusive.
Abusive. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. Great. Okay, now one from the ladies' side before we go back to the other one on the men's side. See, it takes a little while to get into the groove, but it's easy after we're in it. Okay.
Sairam.
Slide down.
I was very moved by the video I saw today of Baba as well. My question is, when he talks about human values, there is so much disruption going on in the world, all the fighting that's going on. How do we, he's talking that we should be teachers. Now, how do we get to these big leaders? And because there's so much destruction going on. And why is he letting it happen?
Okay. Well, that's such a deep question, huh? All this bad stuff going on in the world, and Swami talks about human values. And the question is, what do we do? Is that right? Okay. See what I mean by the distillation process? You know, these aren't just the first questions that come to mind. These are questions that really stay there with us. Okay, another one from the men's side, please.
Sairam.
Sairam.
How do we How do we reconcile the fact that we're urged to go to Puttaparthi by all of the wonderful things you tell us, versus the work we do ourselves here and by ourselves at home? How do we reconcile this great urge that we must go away to get the illumination, so to speak, versus the work at home?
Okay, go away to Prashanti for the illumination versus do the work at home? Is that the question? Okay. Louise said, I think that you're off a little bit. I want to make sure I hear you right. Is that did I interpret your question correct? Okay. Let me try it again then and make sure. Is how do we reconcile going away, or the urge to go away, versus stay at home and do our work here? Okay. I think clear enough anyway. I appreciate that. Okay. Yes.
I have both a statement and a question to make, and that is that it's been my understanding and my practice that we, in terms of being concerned about this society and what we're seeing around us, is that we surrender every moment to act in small ways, big ways, whatever way it is, because when we're touched by something, we're touched by it, and I myself can't rest until I've contributed in some small way. Now, this can often pose a problem, and it has for me in my life, because you're not always understood by other people for your actions. But if, in my experience, if you're really always open to Baba, open to God, it's a matter of trust and surrender, and it does put you through a lot of difficult trials and tests. And sometimes, I know in my own life with what I'm experiencing, I didn't expect to have what would seem to others as disharmony in my life that I'm experiencing right now. I thought I would have more harmony, and it was a great disappointment for me to see some things change radically in my life. Yet I've had to come out of the ashes of that and go on, trusting that I was and I am walking the right path. But it certainly puts you through the test of trial and fire. And I'd just like you to maybe talk about your own experiences of having gone through similar tests, if that's possible.
Talk about our own experiences on what?
Of having gone through similar types of tests.
Okay, good. Thank you. Good. Okay.
This is not a question, it's just a statement that the mics in the center of the room are also working.
Okay. Is there one more question from the men's side? There's one. Okay. Sorry about that. I think hang on to that question. It might get answered later. Please.
In our love and excitement for Swami, often I find that I go and talk to people who do not have any idea about Swami or any belief. But I find it hard to curtail my enthusiasm. And is it right or wrong on our part to talk to people or our friends or relatives who do not have any concept about Swami? And how do you avoid this enthusiasm? I know Swami has said that you don't do that, but I personally find it very hard.
Okay. Talking to non-spiritual or non-psi interested people about this thing that's so important to us.
Right,
huh?
right.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's a great one, too. Okay. Now, just to use the time right, I'm going to start answering some questions, but please, those of you who have an answer, don't feel at all concerned about, or don't hang back. Come on up here and sit in the seats and answer along with us. I'm going to tackle that one about our experiences, because that's the only one that, it's clearly ours. And it's several years ago now, we had a boy, our oldest boy, drowning accident, died. And it's still even hard to talk about. But the things that happened around that, looking back at it in retrospect, were very important spiritually. And I was at Cornell University lecturing at that time, and Louise was in Boston. She had a whole, we had a flock of little kids. And I got the phone call. So I jumped in a taxi, went to the airport in Syracuse, New York, which is quite a ways, and flew back to Boston. And on the way back, such a calamity. He was our oldest. He was the apple of our eye. And such a shock and such a gross, horrible thing that could happen in a family. And I was on the plane in shock and slipping into deep sadness. And I had been brought up Christian in the Catholic religion. And I saw this priest get on the plane in Syracuse. He got on with me, and he sat three seats up from me over on the other side of the aisle, but there was a seat right next to him. And I looked up at that seat, and in this deep despair of mine, I thought, well, I should talk to the priest. So I was all ready to go up there and talk to the priest. But something held me back. I don't know what it was to this day. I have an idea, but something held me back. And I looked at that empty seat, and I looked at it, and I thought, well, I'll go up there, and to break the ice, I'll buy him a drink, or whatever. But no, something held me back. And I never knew why, and I always wondered why I didn't when I had the opportunity, when that seat was open, to go there. And looking back years later, now I see that was probably the beginning of my change from religion to spirituality. That was when something in me told me that you have to shed these tears yourself. You have to face up to this deep life issue yourself, rather than rely on the church. And that, in a funny way, developed strength. And I think that's what we're all doing too, by the way. We're moving in that direction.
That night, Jack came home. I was overwhelmed with grief and tried to sleep. And I did rather semi-sleep, but a voice came to me. and said, "He is your angel now."
Okay. Let's get to these other questions. How do you make the transition from, along that be, then do, then declare? And how do you respond to abusive people? And human values amidst the fighting and the destruction that happens in our world. And the other one is the talking to non-sight people about sight people. I got little comments. I got little comments on all of them, but they aren't nearly as rich as what you can add to it, so I encourage you to add. But one of them is on that be, do, and declare thing, is I think that first be, that's not as if you're climbing up a stairs. I think you might be going in just the opposite direction. Like it's very easy to declare, and it's even easier, especially in the Western world, to do. So being is the hard part. That's what sadhana is about, being. So Swami says first be. What he's really saying is first do your sadhana. First become. It's much, much harder being. And I talk to organizations this way, by the way, and I use this metaphor with business organizations. It's much harder and stronger being than it is doing. It's easy to do. That's the way we can structure all of our time and just continue to do, and without ever even worrying about who we are and what we be. Okay.
Talking to non-Sai people. My sisters are non-Sai. My mother, well, she passed away. But your mother and my mother. Our whole family just kind of ignores that we go to India 6 months a year. Hello? Hi, Ma. We're back from India. Oh. I thought did you leave? Or when did you go? It was just like... It was just like they totally ignore that part of ourselves. And if they come over to the house, of course the pictures are there and everything's there. And even, I'm very selective with my friends. I would say I've dropped 99% of my friends because they weren't going in the path that I was going. Or maybe they dropped me, But it was something.
Oh, and in my work, we do a lot of talking about Sai Baba in the evenings at conferences, and we always make it purely discretionary on their part. It's not at all. And I make sure, by the way, every time that I stand up and I say to the people, we are going to be talking about our experiences with our guru, this God-man in India. It's not going to be a travel log about India, although that might be interesting. This is really going to be about us with Sai Baba. So we make sure that the people who want to be there are come, and the ones who don't necessarily want to be there don't come. So we're very careful about that. Just the other night, last week, Louise and I went and did a reading at a coffee shop and poetry place. One of those like sort of throwbacks to the hip 60s. It was a wonderful place. But these are people all into poetry, and they're into angst. They're into deep depression, and you have to be sad. And here we are talking about this joyous relationship that we have with Swami. Joyous and fun and laughter and so forth. Well, they laughed a little bit because some poetry can be funny, but most of all, they just didn't relate. They really couldn't relate to it. It's just beyond them. I can remember one of the fellows that worked with Scott Peck. Scott Peck, the Road Less Traveled fellow, the runaway bestseller. Very, very nice man. This man that worked with him, very, very nice man. And when we talk about Swami, he would just look at us, and there would be a blank thing that comes over his eyes. In our family, it's the same way. And there's some hurt in that, by the way, because in the family, Louise alluding to, is it's as if we have to erase, when we're with them, 6 months of every one of our years. Interesting. Interesting. And we, by the way, the other day we thought of, maybe this is the same thing that gay people feel too. We never thought of it that way. We've always, sort of watched that whole movement of gay rights and everything else. But then when we realized that how deprived we feel when we're with friends or family, when we can't talk about this very important part of our life, maybe that's the way they feel too. I don't know. And she thought, gee, I never thought of that. And I said the same thing. We never thought of it. Maybe. Okay.
What I do is I'm kind of open about Swami, but when I'm open about Swami, I always get hurt, or they just don't love, or they just, all of you know, you all have non-Psi friends, and you just can't connect with them. And you just can't say, I love him, but it just isn't there.
One time on a plane, I showed my ring to this physicist who was sitting next to me, and he was very interested. Oh, he really liked it. I said, well, you want to know the story behind it? He said, yes. So I told him the story behind it, and he looked at me. He said, that is physically impossible. And I said, that's the point. Sam Sandwich tells a story about when he came back. He was so excited about the ring that Swami made him. He showed it to the stewardess on the plane, and he told her the whole story. He said, boy, you never saw anybody avoid anybody further for the rest of the trip. They avoided him like the plague. Okay, we're really just about ready to close. There's some questions that are important. How do you respond to abusive people? The human values amidst all the fighting and the destruction that are happening in this world?
Remember the war that the United States went, how long ago? How last year. Well, we were in Prashanti, and we were there for a long time, and I got a postcard from somebody from Washington, D.C., and say, Dear Jack and Louise, it looks like the United States is going to war. And I said, what? What? Swami, what are you doing? And Jack, he quietly says, why don't you just tell that to Swami in an interview, as if we're going to get an interview. I love it. So I twirled around and I looked at Swami's picture at the altar. I said, Swami, how can you do this? This shouldn't be done. It's ridiculous. And so we went to Darshan. First thing, Swami calls Jack. Jack calls me. We go into the interview. And then we go into the inner interview. And I said, Swami, what's happening? The United States can't go to war. This is wrong. And he sat back and he said, why fear when I am here?
Somebody else asked him a question about that. What do we do in this world? There's so many bad things happening in the world, Swami. And he said, that's not your problem. That's my problem. Very seriously, he said that. So your problem is to worry about your own universe, the universe inside of you, and to grow spiritually, do your sadhana, move toward God. I think the urge to go to Prashanti, I would love to have you talk with people, at break time about that. And then how do you respond to abusive people? That's also a worthwhile questions. And we got to, seek answers to those. Right now we're out of time, and I think we have to also be disciplined as well as wanting to respond. These chairs are still empty up here, by the way. If anybody has some very quick answers to either of those questions, they certainly can come up. As a closing, let me read something. Oh, were you coming up for the answer? Oh, good. Okay. Let's.
First of all, I'm not in a position to give advice to anybody at all. I just wanted to remember for myself and for the rest of us that what we learned in these 2 days, when we deal with adversaries outside, after tomorrow, we'll go back and face the world and have to face anger and all the rest of it. I just want to remember that I'll give myself room to err and remember love and look at the people who abuse me, and remember, before I speak a word, to think of all the things about we have learned from Baba. Sayonara.
That's what I mean about sharing wisdom. See, that you got a little taste of it. Thank you, Swami. Thank you very much. The wisdom that's here among us, that's in us, wonderful. We have some more? This, by the way, okay.
Saya, this is it is just a comment, and this is what Swami said last year, and you may have heard him. So I thought I will share with all of you, and it relates to the last question, sharing Swami and his teachings with others. And I will read you all quotes, unquotes, nothing my word. I begin. Because of your good fortune, because of your good deeds in your previous lives, you could participate in the propagation of human values. You should fulfill this in the right way, never misuse this opportunity. Swami's view is that human values are contained in everyone, and these should be preserved. Those who have forgotten this should be reminded. Those who have forgotten human values should be reminded, and that duty you should carry out. Each one of us who call ourselves Swami's devotee. He said, you should take an oath. Let us practice and propagate these values. Otherwise, it amounts to doing something harmful to the society. He said, some people will begin, if you are scared, he gives answer to all. Some people will begin to scandalize you. Don't fear such men. Ignore them. Realize that the tree that bears the fruit alone faces all the hits, all the stones. Face difficulties with courage. Have confidence. Have confidence in human values. Rely on God's protection. We do not need anybody's protection. Dharma will protect us. Saya.
Saram, right now I've got so many thoughts going through my head. My sincere hope is that Swami speak through me, and they come out as right can be. The question that I would like to respond to is the Sai brother over there about speaking to non-Sai devotees or non-followers, non-Sai followers about the concept of the Sai phenomena. I think the answer to that would be in Dr. Jha's illustration. First be, then do, then propagate. The question you should ask yourself, am I what I'm trying to propagate? Is this my regular practice? From an experience I can tell you, my dad hated Satya Sai Baba. He used to say, well, here is a guy who's probably sitting on a throne, living in a castle, and I'm sleeping on the floor, worshiping him. This is because he didn't know what Sai was all about. Eventually he realized what it was about, and he changed. And one of the reasons why he said he changed was because of my action. Because I was trying to practice what he was looking for, something that he wanted to hold on to in understanding the psi phenomenon. Secondly, my boss. We worked together and he would always tell me, he said, Troy, I don't understand it. I get so upset with customers and you're always so tolerant. What's your secret? I never talked about my secret. I guess what I'm trying to say is, Swami has said, my life is my message, and he has turned that around and he said, your life is my message. If you like to spread the message of Psi, let it be in your life. Thank you.
Wonderful. End with a reading from the Gita, chapter 13, the field and its knower. You've all heard it many times, and it's so worthwhile. Therefore I tell you, be humble, be harmless, have no pretension, be upright, forbearing, serve your teacher in true obedience, keeping the mind in the body in cleanliness, tranquil, steadfast, master of ego, standing apart from the things of the senses, free from self, aware of the weakness in mortal nature, its bondage to birth, age, suffering, dying. To nothing be slave. To nothing be slave.
To nothing be slave, nor desire possession of man, child, or woman, or home, or of household. Calmly encounter the painful, the pleasant. Adore me only with heart undistracted, turning all thoughts in solitude, spurning the noise of the crowd, its fruitless commotion. Strive without seeking to know the Atman. Seek this knowledge and comprehend clearly as to why you seek it. Such, it is said, are the roots of true wisdom.
Jai Sai Ram.
Sai Ram. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Jack Hawley and Louise Hawley for sharing their experiences with us one more time. Also for imparting to us some wisdom by answering some of those questions. But I'll be failing in my duty if I don't thank everybody else who participated in this program. The questions that you asked, I know it took a lot of courage for some of you to come up and ask those questions. For those two people who volunteered to go on the stage to answer those questions, I know it took a lot of courage on both of your parts. But by sharing in what you thought and what you believed in, shows us once again that we are really family and we are able to listen to and understand each other's problems. And that is why we are all called as a Sai family. And as you can see, I get very moved when I hear the experiences and hear people like that go up on the stage and have the courage to talk to us. Thank you once again to all of you. Just a short announcement, we'll be taking a 15-minute break.